Welcome to Posterity Podcast, a discussion of unusual subjects that touch the lives of everyday people from a Christian worldview.
Okay, now there has to be an episode of outtakes.
Oh,
There has
no,
to be
we'll
an
just put
episode
all
of
this at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Welcome to Posterity Podcast, a discussion of unusual subjects that touch the lives of everyday people from a Christian worldview. This is Mike Carmen, sitting alongside Jay Carmen, coming to you this time from cul-de-sacs in 3 mysteriously undisclosed locations in Ohio and Tennessee via the internet. This episode is part 3 of personal UFO experiences and other related topics. It's the result of a conversation Jay and I had over Skype with our brother Ray the 4th week of August 2020. As you can guess from the introduction, we had a great time hanging out together, but really had a hard time staying on topic. This resulted in a 3-hour conversation having to be edited for time and content. In order to present the most coherent and meaningful conversation, I've edited our discussion in post-production through the injection of some statements and questions which were not originally made in order to make the most of our discussion for the sake of our listeners. We'll even step out of the conversation at one point to overview a 1960s board game our family had called Kabbalah and the importance of not dabbling in the occult. The result is Personal UFO Experiences Part 3 with a dash of some unusual experiences at home and on the road. For the sake of posterity, we hope you enjoy the show.
Family members we mention most often is our brother Ray. Ray's kind of in the middle. I'm the oldest. Mike is the youngest. Ray is in the middle, and we have a couple of sisters on either side there. Ray is a musician, an accomplished musician and recording artist, and he is coming to us tonight from his home in Akron, Ohio. Talk a little bit about his own personal UFO experience. We use Ray's music to open and close the show. And so it just seemed appropriate that as we talk about family experiences, and this is a posterity podcast, it is about, first of all, explaining some of the things that we've experienced as a family and as some of our interests. So I'm going to ask Ray to just kind of get in there and introduce himself and tell us about what he saw.
Hi, this is Ray coming from an undisclosed location. Actually, I'm in Akron, Ohio. Which is like, Akron is one giant outpatient clinic. But that's not the point. The point is, the job that I work, that's what it seems like. Okay, so my experience was, I was still in high school, so it would have been probably thinking 1977, 78. I graduated from Canton South High School in 1980. And I'm pretty sure this was before that. So I'm guessing 1977, 1978. Behind our house was an oil well, a barn, which was still there at the time. It eventually got bulldozed, or I don't know, wind knocked it down or something. It wasn't the safest structure in the world, but it was still there at the time. And then behind that was a field which frequently caught fire. I remember coming home from work a few times and the fire department was down there putting it, because behind that field was an oil well. And sometimes they would burn off some of the excess, and sometimes when they did that, the field would catch fire. Did you guys ever see that happen?
Oh yeah, more than once.
Yeah, that was terrifying. That's what that
Actually,
was.
it was.
Yeah, when you're little, that's like, holy crap, And then behind the oil well, immediately behind it, was the woods. And the weird thing was, a lot of weird things happened in those woods over the years. Like right after we moved in, which would have been, 1966? Is that when we came up to St. Clair's?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right after we moved in, there was the beer joint across the street and just down the street a little ways. I can't remember what it was called.
Was it the White Swan?
White Swan.
It was next to that, though. It was. Was that the name of the bar?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was. Yeah, it was right across the street from the Freeman's house.
Yeah. Right after we moved in there, Mom said that some guy got stabbed in the bar, and then the guy that stabbed him ran down our driveway into the woods, and they never saw him again. So that's one thing that happened. And then I remember, when I was a kid, Dad would take us back there once in a while. And I remember one time he took me and Cindy, and I think Mike, you might have been with us. I don't remember. He took us back there. We were kind of walking in the woods a little ways, and he stopped and he said, just stop where you're at. He said we had to turn around and leave. So we left, and he said later on, there was somebody back there. It was probably a homeless guy, probably a bum. And a lot of times what they would do was, and you can edit this out of the show if you don't think it's appropriate, but they would go to the bathroom. So, I don't know if the guy was posing a threat or if he didn't want to be bothered. A lot of times they don't want to be bothered. And, but he just, was looking out for our safety. So we turned around and came back. And then, of course, the main thing was that the McKinley Airport was how many miles from our house, you think? I don't really know off the top of my head.
I don't remember.
Yeah, it was north and to the west or a little bit way back off toward Mahoning Road. So, yeah, I don't know. Probably as the crow flies, maybe only about 5 miles. But
okay. But the main thing was, we all saw various weird things flying over those woods. And I remember the one that stuck with me the most, the one that I clearly remember is I was standing in one of those, we had those 2 back rooms in the house on the first floor behind the kitchen. And I was standing back there. Again, I was in high school. This is probably 77, 78, this is probably 16, something like that, 16, 17. And I looked out, and this is probably 9 o'clock at night, something like that. And I look out, and there is something moving from my right field of vision to my left. And it was moving about the speed that you would normally see an airplane move. So it wasn't moving real fast or anything, but all I could see was a circular pattern of lights going around and moving from my right to my left. I've never seen that before since. I'm sure it wasn't a plane. You can usually tell if something's a plane. Every once in a while I'd see like a something that was like cigar shaped, and that's kind of a common UFO sight too. But I always figured, well, that's probably a plane. That's probably, I don't, sometimes the way they're flying, maybe it's the light on the wings look a little weird or something. But this was very clearly lights rotating in a circular pattern, probably clockwise, going from my right to my left. It definitely was not a plane. I don't know what weather balloons look like. I don't think it was that either. Was it extraterrestrials? I don't know. But it was definitely, to me, a UFO, because to this day I don't know what it was. Right. And I think we found out later on that a lot of people had seen that. In fact, had been seeing those a lot during that time period.
That's right.
And I don't remember whether I said anything to anybody or not. I'm pretty sure I probably told Dad. Every time we saw something, we'd have Dad run to the back room. Dad, but a lot of times he'd be like, well, that's a plane, or, and sometimes, I don't ever remember seeing anything flying really fast over there. This seemed to be flying at the normal speed that you would see a plane fly at. But, sometimes, you'd see like a private plane or a mail carrier or something like that. They're smaller planes, they're lighter, they're closer to the ground, and they fly faster, or they look like they do anyway. But this just looked like it flew the speed that you would normally see a plane flying at, and it was flying from, well, in this case, it would be flying from east to west.
Right.
And the lights were rotating in a circular, like a clockwise fashion. It definitely wasn't an airplane.
It didn't scare you or anything, or freak you out, or?
A little, but as long as I didn't land on the driveway, I didn't care. You know what I mean?
Land on the garage roof right in front of you, right?
Yeah. As long as they didn't shoot a beam down or anything, I didn't care. But it was far enough away. It's not like it was like right over the house. This was Yeah, I'm really a poor judge of distance, so I don't know what that would have been. But say if what would be the average distance of seeing a plane flying over those woods at that?
Right.
How far away do you think that was, Jay or Mike?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, and they weren't actually, I mean, from the perspective of just watching it, they weren't actually right over the woods. There was a number of flight lines, private airports in the area, a lot of little places. And some of those, and a lot of those flew in that east-west direction out of, Alliance and Louisville and places like that. So if they actually did, if they were flying, at least several hundred feet in the air, 1,000 feet in the air, it would look not particularly far away, but it'd still be, a couple miles out or 3 miles out, something like that. So
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
yeah, so it could have been what you saw, depending on the angle of flight or I mean, your angle of vision and things like that. It could have been several miles away, but knowing what we know about what people were seeing in the area at that time, it wasn't miles and miles away.
No. And I forgot that there was all those private airports back there. I know there was some in I think there was some private airports in Louisville and places like that, which is where would have been coming from. It would have been flying from east to west, so it would have been flying from, say, Louisville towards Maslin or whatever. But yeah, and this gets back to a number of things. First of all, as we know now, there were a lot of, looking the stuff up on the internet and everything, there was a lot of common UFOs in that area back during that time. There's a lot of them. There were infrequent Bigfoot sightings around that time. In fact, probably a few years earlier.
Right.
It was almost like Alliance, Louisville, East Canton was almost like a hotbed of that weird activity.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's like that now. I mean, I have no idea, whether there's all those sightings are real common now. But I just remember, that wasn't the only time I'd see something weird flying over the woods, but you could kind of tell, well, that's probably a plane. Right. Or a small private plane, and they're just, because sometimes they'd move pretty fast. You think, wow, a plane doesn't, from my field of vision, a plane wouldn't fly that fast, or a jet wouldn't fly that fast, when in fact it's probably somebody's private plane or something. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it to me, it definitely was not a plane.
It would not have had the typical light pattern of a plane. No. And we all grew up, we saw blimps and things in the area, not so much where we were, but growing up near the Akron-Canton area, we were used to seeing the Goodyear blimp. We were used to seeing hot air balloons,
Yeah.
We used to see that kind of stuff all the time. So, yeah, what you described doesn't fit anything that we would have seen at the time. And we've mentioned before that Kathy also saw it, and it was in that time frame of, I don't remember how many months that went on, where there were people calling the newspapers and the sheriff's office and the police department and, everybody saying, hey, what is that? Because they were seeing these rotating lights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And even if, let's just say for the sake of argument, that they weren't rotating, if they were just going from left to right to left to right, that's still really weird looking. I don't know of any plane that have a light pattern on it like that. That would move back and forth like that. So, I mean, it definitely was not a plane, and I don't think it would have been a hot air balloon or something. I don't think it's, would a satellite fly that low to the ground? I don't know. But I don't know. But it was very strange, and I don't remember being particularly scared. I remember being a little freaked out about it. But we had all, we were all familiar with UFO sightings and things like that because, you guys had talked about in earlier podcasts of things that you guys had seen, and Dad saw them.
Let's rewind this a little bit. The experience that Ray had and that the two of us have had is related to Dad's interest in the subject. But obviously his interest in the UFO phenomena stems from the fact that he probably traveled so much between St. Clairsville and North Bend, Indiana, and going back and forth kind of northwest to southeast. He saw things as he was driving that piqued his interest in the subject. Would you say that that's accurate?
I would. He drove. There was a couple of years there where he would leave when he was working with the company that he was working with at the time. He would leave on Sunday morning about, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning, drive from where we lived in East Canton to Kokomo, to the plant where his office was. And then he would come back again on Friday night. He usually get in about 7:30. But he did that for a couple of years. But at the time, that long straight trip on State Route 30, because he would take State Route 30 all the way into Indiana, and then you had to go south. I forget on what State Route, Indiana route, to get into Kokomo. And then the plant that he worked at was in Kokomo, but I don't remember exactly where. So,
did he ever talk about particular instances in which he saw things as he was driving back and forth?
Do you remember? I remember one. Do you remember any, Ray?
No. He
said one time he was driving, and it was at night, and he was headed back. Because he would, if it was in the fall, it was always getting dark about the time he got home. Sometimes it was dark. So this was probably fall, winter. And since he got home, they would let him leave a little early. He'd leave around, early afternoon, so he could be home by 6, 7 o'clock Ohio time, or 7, 8 o'clock Ohio time. But he said one time that there was a light, like a glowing light behind a cloud, and he said he saw it and pulled off the road. He was on 30 at the time, headed toward Canton, but I don't know if he was in Indiana or Ohio. I don't know how far west. I don't know if he was in western Ohio, eastern Indiana. I don't know where he was at exactly. But he said he stopped, pulled off, and some other people stopped and pulled off too and watched. And they said this thing, it just looked like an oval-shaped light kind of flying behind the clouds, and it would kind of come out of the clouds and stay in the clouds, and then eventually it just disappeared. It wasn't moving fast, didn't look like an airplane. I mean, and that's the thing. So he knew. He used to fly quite a bit because they would fly him. Some of the contracts he worked with, they would fly him into Utah. So he got to fly. Yeah, he would fly to Utah once in a while. He was not unfamiliar with this stuff. And then when we lived growing up, and I was in kindergarten and we lived up in Talmadge or in Akron off of Talmadge, we would sit out, especially in the summertime, we'd sit in the backyard at this duplex set of duplexes we lived in, and play with the other kids in the neighborhood, and play marbles and stuff. And you would hear the sonic booms. It was freaky. It was just, it'd scare the bejabbers out of you. And especially at night. Well, during the day, you'd think it was thunder. But at night, you had no warning. Just boom, you know. And there were jets, they were doing the supersonic route, military jets doing the supersonic route from places in the west, straight across northern Ohio and into wherever they're going, Pennsylvania or New York or whatever, and back again. So we would hear it. In fact, there used to be television commercials or public service announcements that would explain what you were hearing. This is a sonic boom. And you would see the jet way up there. If it was in the daytime, you'd see the contrail, this fast moving jet. And it disappeared, and all of a sudden, boom, and literally you're a little kid, it just scare you. Yeah. But we would see planes at night flying in and out of the Akron-Canton airport. So we knew what airplane lights looked like. Dad used to take us to the airport. You remember this, Ray? And maybe or Mike, you probably remember too. We would go to the airport, Akron-Canton Airport, and sit and watch the planes take off.
Mm-hmm. They don't let you do that anymore since 9/11.
Right.
Won't let you do that.
I don't know if you remember that, Mike, but he would find one of the runways, and there were places where you could park, and you could watch the jets take off and the planes take off. Sometimes I think it fascinated him. We would stop at community airports sometimes and just watch the planes land and take off. And of course, this was the 60s, early 70s. Probably, I don't think we did it so much after I was about 14 or 15. But it's because those things were becoming commonplace, and it had been commonplace for a while, but that fascinated him. So I don't think that he was at all unfamiliar with landing patterns and light patterns on planes. He knew. And so if he noticed something as unusual, there was a pretty good reason for that.
Yeah. Well, and it's not to say that they were aliens. They could have been military aircraft that nobody had ever seen before.
Right.
Well, I actually do have a story from the day of Dad's funeral. I think we were all three there. The conversation that I had with Aunt Betty, Uncle Al, and Aunt Ramona and I don't know how we got to this point in the conversation, but were you all there when Ramona told her story about Jenny Jacobs? Of course, Grandma's name was Grace, and then I think it was our great-grandmother. Her name was Jenny Jacobs. That's what I remember, and I've seen her on the family tree. Okay. But Aunt Ramona told a story about when her and Wayne got engaged. They went to see her at her apartment. I don't know what the conversation was about. I can't really remember. I remember Ramona saying she was a bit of a mystic, and she had a Bible that she had on the kitchen table, and I think she said she had one of those, felt markers, those things that you can put between the pages to hold your place.
Right.
She opened it up to a particular section of the Bible and was talking to them about something. And Ramona said that the Bible actually began to spin around on the table by itself. And so I don't remember much about the conversation after that. I wish I had written it down, but my conclusion after that was that she was probably a practitioner of the occult, and that might lend some explanation to other things in our family history, so to speak.
Yeah.
So did you guys remember that story?
Yep. I had forgotten that it was Jenny Jacobs, but yeah, I do remember that.
Well, remember, we had a game when we were kids called Kabbalah. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't remember that at all.
Yeah.
Parker Brothers presents Kabbalah.
Yeah.
And we threw it out because of that.
Oh, I don't remember this at all. When was this?
Yeah, I remember it. Didn't it glow in the dark?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was made out of.
Should have. That'd have been cool. But I mean,
yeah, it did actually.
It'd be demonic. You had to glow in the dark, for crying out loud. But I mean, it was it was a game. It was a '60s game. And
similar to a Ouija board.
Had cards with it.
Oh, okay.
I forgot about that. That's right. It was one of these things where it had like an eye on top. It looked like an 8-ball eye, and it would turn around, and you could rock the thing. And I did it once, we did it a couple times, and I'm like, I never really, I wasn't that impressed with it. But Kenny, do you remember Kenny?
Mm-hmm. Kenny Burkett?
Yeah, Kenny Burkett came over one time, and he went in the closet in the bedroom, and he was doing it because he was asking it if Kathy liked him. I don't know that he got the answer that he wanted.
So did this have one of those little things? I forget what you call it on a Ouija board.
No,
is that how it spelled it out, or?
It was a round thing with the letters around it, and it sat on a round base, and it just rocked back and forth by itself. And so you had to have at least two people to balance it. You'd put your fingers on it. Oh. And then it would spin around this little, and a little marble would go around on a track, and the marble would stop on letters. And it was kind of creepy. So, yeah, I did.
See, that kind of stuff. I remember I've always been kind of superstitious about certain things. And I remember one time when I was in King Dapper, we all stopped at McDonald's to get something to eat after a gig, and I ordered my meal, and the total was $6.66, which freaked me out. So I threw in another order of fries just because I'm chances. It's McDonald's is going to kill me anyway. I might as well have fun with it. But no, but speaking of King Dapper, Mike from King Dapper, he once told me that when they were kids, when his sister and his brother were kids, they had a Ouija board, and he's not a Christian, but in fact, I think he's probably an atheist. Well, I think he's agnostic. But he once told me, he goes, he says, "Is there a God?" He goes, "I don't know, but I hope there is." But he said that they had a very weird experience with it, and they threw it out.
Dad said the same thing about Uncle Wayne. He said that Uncle Wayne played with one, told Dad to never do anything like that because things happened.
Yeah, I think that is ultimately why that game just disappeared.
Well, I'm actually looking at this on Google, and this looks familiar, but I can't tell you that I saw it at the house.
Right.
Oh, Kabbalah.
Yeah, but this looks.
You were
familiar.
born when? 69.
Yeah.
It would have been 7.
You can also get Mystic Skull, the game of voodoo.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because the Kabbalah is actually a Jewish thing.
Yeah.
Oh, gee. You know, the 60s were just weird. The 60s and early 70s were just weird.
Let's leave the discussion for a moment to learn some of the significance of what has been discussed in this segment. The purpose of the Posterity podcast is to discuss some of the unusual subjects which touch the lives of everyday people, but to do it from a Christian worldview. The 5 episodes prior to this had been for the purpose of establishing our thoughts on aspects of the UFO phenomena, such as the majestic documents and our own personal UFO experiences. We thought we'd include our brother Ray in this episode because of his own UFO experience. But in our conversation with him, we wound up covering a whole lot more of our family's history than we thought we would. We actually had no idea we'd wind up talking about our great-grandmother, along with our dad, or the game Kabbalah our family owned and played intermittently in the late 1960s and early 1970s. In this episode, and the 2 prior to it, we've been discussing personal UFO experiences and have now revealed a connection to the occult in our own immediate family growing up and going back as far as our great-grandmother. Now, Jay and I have for years recognized that our interest in the UFO phenomena is one that we inherited from our dad. The UFO phenomena, however, is one that is clearly tied in some of its aspects to the occult. Now, I won't take the time to explain the data which has helped us, as well as other Christians and even non-Christians, to arrive at this conclusion. That discussion would be better served in some podcast episodes later on. For now, I'll say that Jay and I agree that when not interpreted through a Christian worldview, the subject of UFOs and all of its related components leads a person away from the true knowledge of God as our Creator and Jesus Christ as the Savior of mankind. We also agree that occult practices in the life of any family, even going back generations, represents a real struggle between Satan and God for the souls of family members. This is clearly what was going on in our great-grandmother's life and her family, and our own when the game Kabbalah was gifted one year probably for Christmas. The following description of the game Kabbalah is taken from the Wikipedia article titled Kabbalah. Kabbalah was a talking board game manufactured and released by Transogram in 1967. It was marketed under the slogan, "The Mysterious Game That Tells the Future." The game was molded out of green plastic that glowed in the dark. It sat upon a hemispherical rocker and was operated by the players touching the solary projectors, which were handles on either side of the game. Unlike most talking boards which are activated by a planchette, the Kabbalah used a large black marble as an indicator. The marble ran around a circular track on the surface of the game. In addition to indicating the letters and numbers printed around the track, the marble could also be used to select one of 22 major arcana cards of occult tarot supplied with the game. Each tarot card had the fortune it predicted printed on the back. The game also had the 12 zodiac signs marked along the track. These could be used to generate a simple horoscope. In the center of the rocking board, the Eye of Zohar was mounted. This plastic eyeball would spin as the board was agitated by the players. The name Kabbalah and the reference to Zohar indicate the game was supposedly related to Kabbalah, an esoteric school of thought in Jewish mysticism. As they operated the game, the players were instructed to chant a phrase which I won't repeat. But concerning Scripture and the Christian worldview, Deuteronomy 18:9 through 14 prohibits the kind of occult practices conducted through Ouija and other talking boards which apparently developed in the United States in the 1880s. Deuteronomy 18:9 through 14 says this: When you enter the land which the Lord God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord. And because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so.
And then the other thing that I was going to mention was, remember, Jay, I asked you about this a long time ago. We were going to, I guess we were driving to Indiana. Mike, I don't know if I ever talked to you about this, but we had stopped at like a rest area or a park.
I was hoping you'd tell the story, and if you didn't, I was going to ask you to bring it up, because I like this.
Yeah. This is an interesting story.
I am not making this up. It didn't Dave Barry used to say that? I am not making this up.
Yeah, and he would do it all in caps.
He would do it all in caps, yeah.
I am not making this up.
God, I never laughed.
And he had to do that because he made so much of this stuff up.
He made so much of it up, yeah. So, an alert reader in, Springfield, Ohio says, we stopped at a park, I guess, or maybe it was a rest area. And, they had these things you could read, but they'd be under glass, so you couldn't take stuff off the bulletin board or whatever. And I swear, I'm not making this up. I swear I saw a notice that had like a drawing of like a farmer on a tractor, and behind him was like this giant ant getting ready to like attack him. And it said, if you see anything unusual, call this number. Again, you're looking at me like I'm crazy.
No,
I always think of that giant, what was it, a giant praying mantis from Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Oh, yeah.
But when you talk about this story, I know you're saying ant, but that's
Space
what I
Ghost.
think of.
Yeah.
was that Brack?
Yeah, he was. There was Brack, and then what was it? Zorak? Was that his name?
Zorak.
I don't.
Zorak was the
player in the
praying
band.
Yeah.
Brack's ratings report.
It's
Going down.
It was like, well, it was Brack presents the Brack Show starring Brack.
And if you see anything unusual, call this number.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I remember you telling me this a few years ago. I had never heard this before until you mentioned it. I guess now it's been 4 or 5 years ago. I actually did. There's that solve the mystery part of me again. Scooby-Doo.
For those of you that are listening.
Yeah.
I realize this is useless. It's going out into a void. Nobody's
listening.
This will be to Pluto
for
by
any of you
tomorrow. That's what
listener,
he's gonna
like,
stop and listen to.
for any of you listener out there,
Go to raycarmenmusic.com. Please.
I looked into that, and I'm pretty sure that you're right. I mean, from the time after we moved to Canton in 1966, we only took a couple of vacations between then and the time I went to college. And on one of them, I remember we just, I don't know, we were kind of around central Ohio. We were only gone for a couple of days. I got a really bad cold. I remember that. And then another time we drove west toward Kokomo. And so I'm pretty sure that what you remember is in that same time frame that Dad was working in Kokomo. So this had to be, 68, 69, maybe 70, somewhere in there. Because one time we did go out in that direction. Part of the reason we went that way was we visited the Armstrong Space Museum. You know what? We visited the Armstrong.
Wright-Patterson?
No, we went to Wright-Patterson. No, did we go to Wright? Yeah.
We went to
I remember
Wright-Patterson.
Yeah, but it seems to me we also went to, we didn't, the Armstrong Space Museum, that's not right. I don't think that was around then because we didn't land on the moon till 69. But we knew about Armstrong, and I think we drove through where he was born, which was...
South Bend.
No. I'm trying to remember. Mike's laughing. I cannot remember.
I was about to interject and say, but did we really land on the moon, Jay?
Yes.
Did we really?
And when we knocked, it had a hollow metallic sound. But anyway, we drove out that way, and I remember going through the town where he was born. But you're right. We stopped at different places. We actually stayed in Kokomo for a day or two and came back. We stayed at that little motel where Dad was, you know.
Well, you want to talk about your music? I'm going to have to get up and go to work tomorrow.
No.
Okay, good night, everybody.
No, it's, well, I've been doing the music thing since 1986. So that's what, 34 years?
Yeah.
You'd think I'd get a watch or something at this point, but that's a joke.
I was just delaying my laugh. That's all.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. I'm here all week. Be sure and tip your waitresses. I've been doing it for 34 years, and I've been in a bunch of bands, and I normally do, song-oriented things. But every once in a while, actually, a lot of times I'll do the experimental instrumental things. And I used to do it all under my name, but now I have a project name called the Ghost Lilies, and that's all that stuff gets put in that area now. But the stuff you've played, like the Hamana thing, that was a thing that me and Bob Ethington did. A recording project called Kinski Spiral, and it was supposed to be like a pop thing, but we kind of did all sorts of different things. We put out like 3 or 4 like CDRs of material, and the first album we did was called Hymns and Fragments, which was like a psychedelic pop record, and then the second one was Contact, and it was all like electronic stuff with your stuff thrown in, and that's where that's from. That's where Hamana is from. And then the third album was called Silent Stars, which was like sort of a folk record. And then we did a short EP of cover tunes, and then that was it. And then because we only played out live ever like maybe twice. It was more of a recording project than anything else. So, but that Hamana thing, that's from Kinski Spiral. And then you'd played something. It was called CPL, and that was me and Mike Crooker, who were in a band now called Librarians with Hickeys. And we're a indie rock band. We got signed to Big Stir Records earlier in the year. Our album just came out earlier this month. We're getting airplay all over the world. We're getting universally good reviews. We've been played on Sirius XM. We get played on this one Scottish station, and they can't pronounce our name. It's like Librarians with Hackies. That's how they Librarians with Hackies. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. I play drums in a band called The Chance. I'm just the drummer. It's like a trio kind of thing. And then I do a folk, an alternative folk thing with my friend Jim Weiser, where he writes all the songs and I help play on them and record them. And then the Ghost Lilies thing is supposed to be me and Jim Weiser also, although lately it's just been me. I put out a CD called The Trouble with Angels, which I think I sent to you guys.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That was under the name Abandoned Playground, but I changed the name because that's too clunky sounding. And then I sent that Ghost Lilies disc Over the Hill. I sent that to you, Mike. Did I send that to you, Jay? I'm pretty sure I did.
Yeah, you sent it to me.
Was it Over the Hill?
It's
It's funny.
called
I
Over
don't-
the Hill, yeah.
Name a
It's like-
song that's on it.
There's one called Grace.
Over the hill.
The first track is phone call / over the hill. It's a picture of like it's like the Walgreens next door to where I work, but it's mostly like the top and then like the sky. That's the cover picture.
I don't remember that.
If-
That's funny. I
let me
don't
know-
remember that one.
Let me know if you don't have it. I have a couple extra copies. I'll send you one.
Okay.
And then I have another Ghost Lilies thing coming out, hopefully towards the end of the year. I
And
have
so
two other
Ghost
things.
Lilies is not a group. It's a
It's me. It's me. It's supposed to
Okay.
be me and Jim Weiser. It's just another
Okay.
recording project, but it's
okay.
at this point it's basically me. Although
Uh-huh.
Mike Crooker is working on one piece with me. So,
Mhm.
and the trouble with Angels, that was under the name Abandoned Playground, which was me and Jim Weiser and a few other people. But I changed the name to the Ghost Lilies because I just think it's a better name. Well, thanks for having me on. I hope some of it was informative.
Sure, it was.
You know,
It definitely was. So
so-
Part of this is putting together an oral history for the purpose of posterity, whether it sounds meaningful and coherent to people who listen to it generations from now. We don't know, but we'll try.
yeah. And the
Well, thanks for having me on, and I hope it was entertaining, and I hope it was some of it was informative.
It was.
and I'm gonna go back and figure out why those kids made that video of that eagle picking up. Well, they had me sold.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks for
See
listening.
ya.
Thank you.